Lou Thesz is often heralded as one of the greatest professional wrestlers of all time, a multiple-time NWA World Heavyweight Champion, a pioneer of legitimate grappling, and a symbolic bridge between wrestling's carnival roots and its televised heyday. But beneath the surface of his accolades lies a lingering question asked by modern fans and historians alike. Was Lou Thesz kind of a jerk backstage? By the way, if you haven't already, remember to subscribe for wrestling history nobody else talks about. To answer this fairly, we must separate the myth from the man. While Thesz was undeniably respected for his technical brilliance and for being a shooter, someone capable of handling themselves in real combat, respect is not the same as affection. Through his rigid philosophy on wrestling, personal conflicts, most notably with Buddy Rogers, and his critical stance on the evolving industry in later years, Thesz cultivated both reverence and resentment. Lou Thesz was a product of an era when professional wrestling was still transitioning from legitimate contests, and works, predetermined outcomes. In that climate, being a real shooter wasn't just about pride, it was a matter of business security. Champions had to be able to handle themselves against any challenger, especially in territories where double crosses were common, and a title could be stolen in a match gone rogue. Thesz trained in catch-as-catch-can wrestling under Ed Strangler Lewis and George Tragos, both men known for their brutal styles and emphasis on grappling credibility. For Thesz, wrestling wasn't just entertainment, it was a craft and a test of one's manhood. This value system forged an uncompromising view of who deserved respect backstage. Thesz reportedly didn't take kindly to wrestlers who couldn't back up their persona with real ability. He had little patience for showmen without legitimate skills, and in a profession where illusion and personality increasingly drove business, this made him seem dismissive or elitist. Wrestlers who came from football or bodybuilding backgrounds, without real mat credentials, often felt looked down on by Thesz. But was this a case of being a jerk, or simply holding others to a higher standard? It's a fine line. Thesz's reverence for toughness wasn't just about ego, it was about safeguarding the business. He believed the illusion only worked if it was grounded in legitimacy. Still, his disdain for less technical wrestlers could come off as snobbish or exclusionary, particularly to younger performers trying to find their footing in an evolving industry. Perhaps the most telling incident in evaluating Thesz's backstage temperament is his long-standing disdain for Buddy Rogers. If Thesz was the stoic grappler, Rogers was the flamboyant showman. Blonde hair, bombastic promos, and a style built more on charisma than credibility. Their rivalry, both in the ring and behind the curtain, reveals much about Thesz's character. In 1963, the National Wrestling Alliance planned for Thesz to drop the NWA World Heavyweight Championship to Buddy Rogers in order to crown a new face of the business. Rogers was massively over with fans, particularly in the Northeast, and was seen as a more commercially viable champion. However, Thesz flatly refused to lose the title to Rogers in a traditional match. He didn't respect Rogers as a wrestler and believed he couldn't be trusted in a shoot-style scenario. Thesz would later go on to say in his autobiography that he refused to let Buddy win out of principle. The match in Toronto in 1963 between the two legends changed the entire course of wrestling history and ironically set professional wrestling off in a direction that Thesz was trying to avoid. Whilst Lou remained the NWA champion, which at the time was considered the real world championship, Buddy would be crowned the first ever WWF champion, which is now known as the WWE. See, even back then, the WWE had more of a preference for performers rather than wrestlers. They were making their way towards what professional wrestling would become, rather than what it had been. So what does this episode say about Thesz? On one hand, he was protecting the championship's integrity from someone he didn't see as deserving. On the other, it reeks of personal disdain and possibly ego. Couldn't he have simply gone along with the company's direction for the sake of business? Did he view himself as the final arbiter of who was worthy of the title? To a certain degree, yes, and it's easy to see why. If you come from that background of being a shooter and being trained by a man very much responsible in part for pro wrestling's boom in the 20th century, then it's pretty hard to not want to protect that business in a very serious manner. Many backstage at the time took Thesz's side, citing Rogers' ego and inconsistent professionalism. But others saw Thesz as rigid and overly self-important, unwilling to do business in a cooperative industry. The answer likely lies in between. Thesz wasn't unreasonable, but his personal standards sometimes clashed with the business realities of pro wrestling's shift toward entertainment. In his later years, Thesz became something of a cynical sage. He remained active in wrestling well into his 60s. His last match taking place in Japan at the age of 74, and he never minced words about what he thought the industry had become. In interviews, columns, and conversations, he often criticized modern wrestling for abandoning realism in favor of spectacle, including his rather harsh take on Hulk Hogan. Then again, as time has gone on, it looks like we all agree with Thesz with regards to Hulk Hogan. Thesz looked down on gimmicks, over-the-top personas, and the increasing reliance on choreographed spots. He frequently expressed dismay at how many modern stars couldn't apply basic holds, cut a believable promo, or handle themselves in a real fight. While this critique wasn't without merit, it also painted Thesz as someone stuck in a bygone era. Wrestlers who came up in the 1980s and 1990s, like Ric Flair and Bret Hart, still praised Thesz's contributions to the craft. Yet they also acknowledged that the business had evolved. The theatrical elements that Thesz loathed had become the primary drivers of wrestling's popularity. Vince McMahon's WWF wasn't selling realism, it was selling superheroes. To younger wrestlers, Thesz may have seemed bitter or even petty. His commentary, though rooted in passion for the sport, often came across as judgmental. While he never engaged in mean-spirited gossip or politics like some of his peers, his principled stance sometimes made him appear aloof or out of touch. He wasn't a bully, but he wasn't a warm mentor either, unless you shared his worldview. So, was Lou Thesz a jerk backstage? Yes, in some ways, but not in the malicious, toxic sense that term often implies. Thesz was demanding, proud, and sometimes dismissive of those he felt didn't respect wrestling as a legitimate craft. His reverence for shooters made him wary of flashier performers like Buddy Rogers. His refusal to lose to certain people wasn't born of petty ego, but of a deeply ingrained code about who deserved to hold a world title. And his critiques of modern wrestling, while sometimes cantankerous, came from a sincere place. That said, Thesz's rigidity and lack of adaptability may have alienated those who didn't see wrestling the same way. He could be cold, critical, and to some, condescending. His backstage demeanor wasn't universally warm, and younger or more theatrical wrestlers may have found him difficult or dismissive. But there's a difference between being difficult and being disrespectful. By most accounts, Thesz wasn't a backstabber, a politician, or a bully. He was just uncompromising. In an industry built on illusion that made him both a paragon of integrity and occasionally an outsider in his own evolving world. In the end, Lou Thesz was not a jerk in the traditional sense, but he wasn't always easy to work with either. He was a man out of time, defending a code that fewer and fewer around him believed in. That made him a hero to some, a hurdle to others, and a legend to nearly everyone. So in my opinion, definitely not a jerk. It's really hard to judge 20th century men by the standards we now judge people. I have no doubt that if he was in a coaching or mentorship role now within the WWE, we probably have stories about him being rather harsh in his critiques or training of the younger wrestlers. But there's an argument that modern wrestlers would have developed more of an understanding and respect for the history of professional wrestling if under Lou's tutelage. It also can't be ignored that people like Bret Hart and Ric Flair speak fondly of Lou because Bret and Flair are considered two of the greatest in-ring workers of all time. Even though Flair would adopt the moniker of Lou's greatest rival, he truly understood the significance and importance of Lou's impact on professional wrestling. But what do you think? Was Lou Thesz just an old jerk who needed to get with the times? Or was Lou right all along? How do you think the world of professional wrestling would look today if mainstream wrestling had followed more in line with Lou's philosophy, rather than turning to showman and following more of Buddy Rogers' sort of style? Leave a comment down below, like and subscribe. Thanks for watching.